to after slavery. But let's start looking at the nature of these traumas so we can get up close and personal. It gets a little gory here because I want you to know we got to tell the truth. And you know, it amazes me how many people, when I start talking about what occurred during slavery, it amazes me how people want to leave out certain things. You notice how many, and I'm sure here in New York is a very special place, and this is a very special time. No, it is. New York is a city that is very, very powerful in its potential to change the world. Y'all need to get back with Harlem. Okay, we need to get that back. But aside from that, let's look at what you experience. And the reason why I'm saying this is an interesting thing, because you notice how many children go missing and stuff like that? Or you know how many pedophiles show up all of a sudden? They're the teacher, they're the gym coach, they're the all these folks. You notice how that's kind of happening a lot? Right. And you know the Dahmers is showing up. Gacy, cutting up the bodies, putting them under. You notice how all these folks kind of, you also know what they look like, right? Okay, but all right. Just stay with me. Stay with me. Can you imagine those people who know socially this is deviant behavior? It does not meet with the norm, right? This is something that is taboo. But you see, during slavery, you didn't have to worry about that upsetting the social order, now did you? You didn't have to be questioned on your moral conduct because you could buy your pathology. You could buy it at 2. And you could do what you wanted with it for as long as you wanted to, anytime you wanted to, with absolute impunity. There was nothing to be done. You could buy what you wanted. And we don't want to think about that sick, maniacal person that bought it. But you know they did. You know they did. But we don't mention them. We talk about the happy master. They gave the happy slaves nice quarters and treated them kindly. That's what we talk about. And yet we see a pervasive number of those people that are doing that now. They did it then. But then some of you may say, well, I don't know. Is that written somewhere, Joy? So let's go to what is written. There are a couple of books if you want. Some of people, it's interesting how we get hung up on things. People have questioned the Willie Lynch story. I don't care. You can question it if you like. Maybe throw it out if you want. Get 100 Years of Lynching, the book. And you get the newspaper accounts. It makes Willie Lynch look silly. Okay? And if you want the pictorial, without sanctuary. It's not table reading, but if you want to see it, it's there. Okay, so we don't have to worry about whether the people want to substantiate it, because that's the first thing they do. And they find someone that's black too, unsubstantiated, by the way. But let's look at what the law said. There's a book called Southern Slavery and the Law. And the one thing that's very important about this is written by a man named Thomas. Last name is Thomas. Southern Slavery and the Law. What's interesting about this is the opening chapter talks about the preoccupation with the black male penis size. You know how we keep talking about the myth and this and all that? Their whole first chapter devoted to the preoccupation with the male genitalia, which may explain why shortly after being lynched, they were castrated. But let's look at what the law says. And if any slave resists his master or owner or other person by his or her order correcting such slave, and shall be happen to be killed in such correction, it shall not be accounted felony. But the master, owner, and every other such person so giving correction shall be acquit of all punishment and accusation for the same, as if such accident had never happened. That's called the Casual Killing Act. That means if you happen to be beating your slave and you beat him to death, it couldn't be considered a felony. It was simply an accident while correcting the slave. And that sounds like painfully familiar to us around excessive use of force. Right? And we start looking at the appropriate use of force and how many of us end up dead because that was the amount of force that they needed to correct. But let's look at this even closer. Why would you beat a slave to death? Well, you couldn't fine them because they had no money. You didn't want them to get jailed because then their labor is lost to you. So you must beat them severely in order for them to submit to you. Thus, slavery in inherent in the process was violence, you see. And they say, we're violent. But who pushed whom first? So let's look at another aspect. Those of you that understand that everything we do, we tend to pathologize. So how many of you are familiar with J. Marion Sims? J. Marion Sims. How many women in the audience know what a vaginal speculum is? Okay. So I bet you the brothers that we lost you on that. It's an instrument that is used to peer into the vagina. It was created by this J. Marion Sims. He was credited to this day as being the wealthiest physician to have ever lived, given that. So let's read about what he did. J. Marion Sims was a physician in the mid-1800s who was credited with the creation of the first vaginal speculum, which was made from a pewter spoon. Sims had built a makeshift hospital in his backyard where he conducted surgical experiments on unanesthetized African slave women. Sims reasoned that slave women were able to bear great pain because their race made them more durable, and thus they were well suited for painful medical experimentation. Because you know, Thomas Jefferson said we felt less pain, we didn't need sleep, and we didn't feel grief. That's really convenient, isn't it? So now we understand, well, how did they get these women? Where did these women come from that Sims got? So now let's go back and take a look. Well, they were brought to Sims, and the people would complain. Each one of these slave masters would bring these women in, and they'd say, this young woman here is not fit for duty. And Sims would look at these women, and indeed they suffered from something called a vaginal fistula. You might have heard about this. Oprah talked about it. The woman on there was talking about a vaginal fistula. And a vaginal fistula often occurs during childbearing when a woman will tear so deeply that it will tear through the urinary tract and the bladder. In fact, you will have feces and urine that will drip through uncontrollably. It does heal, but it smells and it's very uncomfortable, and it's really a horrible state for women, largely due to the smelliness of it. But if you are in fact one of those women that have a vaginal fistula, can you still work the fields? Sure you can. You can work the field. You'll be smelly. It may be uncomfortable, but you can work the fields. Can you sweep and clean in the house? Can you feed the animals? Well, then what makes her, J. Marion Sims, unfit for duty? I need to have sexual access to her. So you need to fix her so that I can do her. Because that is her duty to me.